ethical approach into organizations. Hello, I am Raymond Enriquez Liboro, and I live in the Philippines. Good morning, good afternoon, good night.
Panelists who are here to generate and lead the conversation on the promotion of an ethical approach to data privacy and protection into organizations. Thank you for being here today to share your insights in this session. Throughout our experience as data privacy regulators and advocates, there have been so much discussions on operationalizing data privacy and protection and protecting human rights through accountability, compliance, and risk management. These discussions have accelerated in light of rapid advancement of technology, specifically artificial intelligence or AI. The COVID 19 pandemic caused the dawning of the new reality. So much of our lives have moved online practically overnight, and AI is shaping so much of what is happening to our people's lives. AI speak to people through digital assistants, AI-powered chatbots process customer needs. AI helps prevent fraud to protect consumers. Today, AI is causing a revolution in medicine and health through AI-enabled diagnosis and treatment of seniors and patients. Indeed, AI is touted to be creating a lot of good. Yet, why are experts worried about the long-term implications of AI and doubts if ethically designed AI will be the norm in the coming decade? In a study conducted by the Pew Research Center, where they gathered hundreds of experts, majority fear that AI, which is such a powerful tool now in the hands of organizations, will be primarily developed for profit and social control. Fellow regulators, I understand that we're all in a situation where our laws are always catching up with the rapid pace of technological development. That is why we are amending our laws or even proposing new ones. New jurisdictions are emerging with their own data privacy laws. As seen in the Asian region where I come from, there are new emerging jurisdictions with their own data privacy and protection laws. But are our laws enough to help guide good behavior in personal data processing? Or should our laws go hand in hand with the promotion of ethics that can be applied on the firm level, together with accountability and compliance? How do we foster ethics in organizations and apply the privacy golden rule of don't do unto others what you do not want to be done unto you when wielding AI? How can regulators evangelize and promote to organizations to put themselves in the shoes of data subjects, to think and act beyond consent, to collect only what they can protect, and develop and promote engineering techniques that fully respect the dignity and rights of individuals? An ethical approach to data protection is one of the life advocacies of our dear colleague, the late Giovanni Buttarelli. And together with our panelists, Mr. Stephen Bonner, Ms. Irina Raicu, Ms. Constanza Gomez Mont, and Ms. Bojana Bellamy, we will continue advancing this mission on his behalf. Let us have a very fruitful and engaging session, and I encourage everyone to participate and share their thoughts. So let's start. Our first speaker, Stephen Bonner, is the Executive Director of Regulatory Futures and Innovations at the United Kingdom's Information Commissioner's Office, or ICO. Mr. Bonner joined the ICO to lead work in developing their capacity and capability to regulate new and emerging technologies and innovations. He leads programs of work to develop strategic ICO positions and technology issues, such as data, supervision of the large technology platforms now in remit, online harms, especially on children. That is why Stephen is leading the implementation of the Age Appropriate Design Code, or the Children's Code, aiming to create a better internet for children. Mr. Bonner, you may start.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Raymond. As you can imagine, the kind of topics that I cover often touch on novel ethical issues. But I want to take us back for a second to the heart of the matter. At the heart of the use of data is trust. There is no sustainable innovation without trust. And legislation provides a minimum baseline. But trust needs something beyond those minimum standards. If I go to a restaurant, I expect a minimum standard of cleanliness, likely enforced by some kind of health inspectors and food hygiene regime. But if I care about animal welfare, I might be more likely to go to a restaurant that advertises free range meat within its menu. If I had concerns about the environment, I might track down places that use minimum food miles. I might seek out fair trade or want to support local economies. These places aren't just going to sell me food, they're places that operate in line with my personal values and standards and make me feel more comfortable in those environments. And the same issues extend to employees. If an organization isn't matching their personal values and standards, these staff could and do choose to work elsewhere, meaning you're not getting quality staff to cook the food and serve the customers. This isn't a good experience for individuals, but it also is bad for business. It's the same in our world, for example, with AI. A service might have all kinds of potential benefits, but if people don't trust it, they won't use it. And the way to create trust is to be trustworthy. That sounds quite simple, but that means to act beyond the minimum and demonstrate an ethical framework that extends beyond just seeking profit at all costs or aiming to be the lowest possible in terms of the baseline, or even in some cases, aiming below that minimum baseline. As organizations realize this and try to respond, they have choices about it. Do they walk the walk or just talk the talk? People are starting to see through the phenomenon of ethics washing, using the right language to cover for unethical practices. Things like having oversight teams that have no real power, or engaging with external reviews that are all entirely funded by the organizations themselves, producing conflicts of interest. Within the ICO, we've been focusing on four key areas around ethics. What are the existing practices in this area? What are the organizational structures that support ethical decision making? What is the process for making ethical decisions? And how do you demonstrate information compliance programs? We've also been thinking about the hugely important value of fairness, which is one of the cornerstones of our data protection, and how this is assessed. There is no question ethics are going to be vitally important for innovations to thrive. Organizations built on an ongoing set of structures which do the best for the individual, attract the best staff, and create the best outcomes are the future. I'm really excited to hear the work of my fellow panelists have been doing in this space.
Thank you, Stephen. You just delivered a very powerful opening statement. Act beyond the minimum. Is that the clarion call now for all firms, for all controllers? Now that we are faced with such a powerful tool as AI, but our next discussion will be stretching and discussing this further. Let me call on Ms. Irina Raicu. She's the director of the Internet Ethics Program at the Marcula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. Her work focuses on a wide variety of issues, including online privacy, data ethics, social media's impact on society, the ethics of encryption, and AI ethics. She is the co-author of a variety of teaching materials, and her writings has appeared in many publications, such as The Atlantic, Recode, USA Today, Slate, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Ms. Raiku, you may now take the floor.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank first the organizers of this panel for inviting me. I want to clarify that any views expressed are my own, not necessarily those of the center. And I did write down my initial comments just to make sure I set the context right for our future conversation. So I wanted to just start by saying that privacy and AI are key ethical issues. And they are not just questions of human rights. We've been used to treating privacy as an issue related to human rights, but also very much related, as Stephen just said, to justice and fairness, and also to the common good. Privacy by design considerations imply a need to listen to and to protect those who are most vulnerable, including those most subject to information asymmetry. So this is a key issue that I think we all need to think about. I think sometimes the technologists designing the technology don't realize how little people understand about what's happening, about this opaque ecosystem that we have, especially around internet issues. I want to also underscore that ethical analysis is a skill which needs to be developed and practiced, and therefore technologists and others within a variety of organizations would benefit from relevant ethics training, which addresses privacy as one of multiple and sometimes clashing ethical issues. Such ethics training is best provided actually even before people start in their professional roles. The movement now is toward the requirement of relevant applied ethics training as part of the education of technologists and designers. And I would argue we would look for others as well. But technologists and designers can't do it all on their own. The right incentives must also be in place, and laws can play a big role in creating incentives and disincentives. Privacy and AI as ethical issues take us beyond legal compliance. There will always be novel questions and gray areas in which it's not clear which laws apply or how, and sometimes laws clash too. So people will still have to make ethical determinations about what actions to take or not to take. Also, many privacy laws exempt, for example, small businesses below a certain threshold, but such companies can still impact large numbers of people, and the fact that they don't have to worry about compliance doesn't mean they're exempt from ethical duties. There are multiple distinct ethical issues related to data privacy, and they intersect very much with our conversation about AI. Enough that we can categorize them, for example, as ethical issues related to data collection, and we already mentioned consent, for example, ethical issues related to data analysis, such as the training of AI models on the data collected, whether it was ethically collected or not. Ethical issues related to the protection of data sets. And here I mean not just cybersecurity concerns, but also questions about, for example, responses to requests for access from law enforcement or from governments. And ethical issues related to data retention or deletion. We can talk about the need for expiration dates and the potential danger of unanticipated uses for data sets collected for one purpose, but years in the future may be very much misused, unethically used for a different purpose. So I wanted to introduce here a useful metaphor. The center where I work has a set of free resources online called Ethics and Technology Practice. And my then colleague Shannon Bauer, who is a philosophy professor and is now at the University of Edinburgh, wrote that ethical issues are like birds. Like birds, they are everywhere, some local, some regional, some global, some rare, and some common. In this context, I would say that in some countries at least, privacy has become like the pigeon of the ethical issue bird role. We do recognize it as an ethical issue. AI fairness was one of those birds that we didn't recognize for a long time, right? Now we know to look for it. Like birds, they are varied, some big, some small, some exist in a huge range of different forms. They can be difficult to spot, even when hidden in plain sight. Sometimes they're all around us and we just don't notice them. Like birds, ethical issues are frequently concentrated in particular areas and environments. They are easier to spot and identify in groups than when we try to do it alone. They are sometimes more easily spotted with special guides or tools or lenses, like the frameworks that we're going to be talking about. They are noticed by people who are in the habit of looking for them, and this is why we talk about the need for training. And they can often be anticipated if you know where and when they tend to show up. So getting good at noticing and identifying ethical issues, like bird, is a skill that takes repeated practice to develop. This is still from our materials. I'm quoting, I should have said that the metaphor and what I'm reading now is straight from our materials. But you don't need to be an academic expert on moral philosophy to acquire this skill, just as most expert bird watchers are not ornithologists. What matters is not a theoretical knowledge of ethics, though this can be a useful tool like a bird watcher's field guide, but practical experience and skill assessing the ethical landscape in those areas connected to our life and work. End quote. And I feel free quoting this because I am a co-author of the materials as well. I will say that these experiences and skills are increasingly in demand and increasingly necessary among those who design the technology that helps shape all of us, including our perceptions of privacy. Thank you. I'll throw it back to you, Raymond, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Irina. It's the first time I heard the metaphor of birds and AI, but you were really spot on. And we will discuss it more during the discussion portion of our portion. All right, let me now proceed to our third speaker, Ms. Constanza Gomez Mont, the founder and chief executive officer of C-Minds, an impact technology agency based in San Francisco and Mexico City. Constanza also works with governments and institutions in the development of public policy and programs on issues of digital transformation, seeking to enhance the benefits of new technologies in emerging countries. Constanza has been a consultant for the United Nations, the World Bank, and national and local governments. Her work, which covers new technologies, society, and the environment, the adoption of human rights based technology social good, and AI governance, has been recognized internationally, where she has been awarded numerous citations. So, Ms. Constanza Mod, you may start your discussion now.
Thank you very much, and hola. Thank you, Commissioner Liboro. I am very glad to be here. As it has been said, there is no doubt that AI is a crucial matter. And in this sense, developing an array of mechanisms to ensure that there are safeguards in place, especially in high-stakes situations, is a balancing act and a profoundly important endeavor over time, no doubt. We at C-Minds, the action tank I lead, have been working actually in the past years with our partners to answer a key question that I think I share with a lot of the panelists. How can we enable trust and confidence in the development and use of AI? How can we empower citizens and enable accountability for the entire AI ecosystem? These core questions have taken us to focus on privacy, and most recently in AI transparency and explainability and non-discrimination, with a very special focus and attention for the Latin American context. We have definitely learned by firsthand in the last months that there is a great difference when these concepts are treated as means and not ends. In C-Minds, being a lab for AI governance, we believe strongly in the power of experimental projects that allow us to learn as an ecosystem, and through these collective learnings, actually develop participatory and inclusive AI ethics frameworks in the forms of guides and standards and regulations. I actually emphasize these experimental methodologies because answering the question on how best to regulate a field that presents so many complexities, speed, and tensions needs necessarily spaces to learn between sectors before regulatory frameworks are set in place. In this sense, policy prototypes for AI governance are such type of collaborative mechanism that are both multi-sector and participatory. And these exercises, I believe, are key to advance AI governance and answer how best to regulate given the specific contexts of every country. This helps especially understand regulatory challenges on AI transparency, explainability, and non-discrimination, topics that were just recently described by you and my other panelists. And there's no existing regulation in this space, and these policy prototypes serve to explore this area for this unknown. During the last months, we have actually implemented a policy prototype on AI transparency and explainability in a multi-sector project with Facebook, the Inter-American Development Bank, the support of the National Institute for Transparency and Access to Information on Personal Data from Mexico, the participation of companies and experts in the field. It has been both a privilege and a challenge to learn hand in hand with all type of stakeholders how best to regulate this. And in these opening words, I highlight the key point that results from our experience in the last months, collaborating with them all. There needs to be an ecosystem approach, definitely. And most importantly, having environmental mitigations to reduce risks that are not only solely based on AI technical systems. And for this, the role of regulators is no doubt key, and this has to be embedded in all integral processes. I highlight two key actors that are important for these environmental mitigations. One, consumers and citizens as a whole. How can we create a supply of these practices and a swift adoption of companies if there is no awareness of the subject that leads to a demand or a recognized value of these practices? And this demand and awareness is especially important in high-stakes situations, and especially in low and middle income countries is a must. And second, investors, the whole role of the AI ecosystem as a whole. We need to align not only regulatory compliance incentives, but also economic ones to be able to answer the question on how to promote an ethical approach into organizations. I will keep commenting on these lessons from their work in Mexico during the next conversations, and very happy to be here.
Thank you, Constanza. Our next discussant is Bojana Bellamy. She is the president of Hunt and Andrews Kurth LLP's Center for Information Policy Leadership, a preeminent global information policy think tank located in Washington, D.C., London, and Brussels. At CIPL, Bojana works with global business and technology leaders, regulators, policy, and lawmakers to shape global data policy and practice and develop thought leadership and best practices for responsible and trusted use of data. Currently, Bojana sits on a number of advisory industry boards, including the Internet Commission Advisory Board and the OECD's Privacy Guidelines Expert Group. Prior to joining CIPL, Bojana served for 12 years as the Global Director of Data Privacy at Accenture and worked as Principal Consultant with Privacy Law and Business Consulting and auditing projects for private and public sector clients in the UK and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have Bojana speak to us today. So, Ms. Bojana Bellamy, you may now take the floor.
Thank you, Raymond Liboro. It's always a pleasure to share a panel with you, and I look forward to the very good discussion. And to all our friends in Mexico and globally, I wish we were all together, but we are not. So this is the second best,
Yeah.
we all virtually. Several things that I'd like to discuss tonight. It is evening here. So first of all, you know that CIPL has been working a lot on the topic of accountability and accountable AI most recently. And in our work, we have learned several things. Accountability is really organizations stepping up their commitment and behaviors and being able to demonstrate their commitment to data privacy. And we have found that values and ethics very much sits below accountability. It informs and shapes how organizations actually put in place accountability. Many organizations are today putting in place codes of business ethics. They've got certain values through which they have to live and demonstrate. And it is interesting to see how data privacy and data ethics are starting to become part of these larger corporate values. While I was, you mentioned Accenture, while I was there, we used to have a value respect for individuals or one global network, which actually informed the way we built our privacy program around user-centric respect to individual, and one global network, which meant no matter where we operated, we were providing the same level of privacy protection. And that is actually what many companies are trying to do today. Somebody mentioned, Stephen, I think it was you and Irina, about the importance of trust. It is absolutely critical that trust drives corporate behaviors. You would not be surprised to know, for example, that some of the companies I work with have put trust as their first operational principle. They actually measure how they do on trust. They report on activities that enforce and develop trust. So these are really some of the things that there to not only promote accountability, but also make these values and ethics live through the behaviors. I think in the past year, we have seen two things. We have actually changed the accountability and ethics world much more. One is the COVID, of course, or past 2 years, right? Companies had to make some really difficult ethical decisions. How do we use data in the context of COVID? And I think those who had accountability and data ethics compasses, they were able to do these decisions better. And the second thing is that we have realized the huge potential of AI and, in fact, data analytics. And of course, those tools have raised all kinds of that ethical issue. So to me, it is not surprising that I'm seeing emergence of the best practices, accountable, ethical behaviors and controls, policies, procedures in the development of AI. And we actually at CIPL, as you know, we've done quite a lot of work on general accountability, but in 2022, we will be actually doing a mapping exercise where we would like to collect the best practices that we are seeing emerging and see how they start mapping maybe to CIPL accountability wheel. I'm seeing already patterns. I'm seeing lots of work done on leadership and oversight, a lot done on risk assessments, ethical AI, human rights risk assessment, a lot done on policies, procedures, training data scientists, ensuring there is translation between the rules and the behaviors and the data science and the trade-offs as well. So it will be really interesting to see whether this is just the question of just few companies, the best companies who are doing this, or we can see a general market moving towards a better accountability on use of AI. I personally think that we are starting to see the shift simply because it is about trust and it's about business. It's not anymore about compliance, right? Privacy and ethics is beyond compliance, and companies, smart companies, are starting to realize that. They're doing this because it's a good thing to do. It is good for their business. It enables them to use data in a better, more efficient way. And it's not about data being new oil. It's about data being new environment. It's about environmental protection, right? Data is just like that. It's critical for our ecosystem, and we have to make sure we have got the data in the system, which is appropriate, properly used, and sustainable. So final point is really 2 points. One is that there's been some external developments that have changed also how companies look at this. And that is that investors are starting to ask questions around ESG, environmental sustainability, governance, and privacy is starting to be attached to these topics, right? Security, privacy, data ethics. How do we know that we are investing in businesses that are going to actually maintain the value and will be responsible corporate citizens? And with that, I'm also seeing in companies a new agenda of responsible business, corporate digital responsibility or sustainability. My former company, Accenture, has just appointed Chief Responsible Business Officer. And it's all about what is the impact of our business on the world, on the stakeholders, on people, on employees as well. And I think that's really where data ethics and privacy are starting to rub the band with want to be the responsible business. Final point is twofold. One is that ethics is not far away from legal compliance, and I will tell what I mean by that. In order to comply with fairness principle of data privacy, in order to comply with user-centric transparency, to decide whether legitimate interest balances the rights of individuals, you have to make ethical decisions, right? That ethical judgment, decision-making moments in the legal journey as well. And I think those companies, again, who have got that dialogue, who are able to consider that beyond just legal compliance, are going to excel. However, this is important for regulators as well. Ethical data ethics is not only about addressing the risks and harms of data use and technologies that we develop. It is very much about understanding what are the benefits of what we are trying to do. What would happen if we do not do this? Because there is ethics in losing ability to use data. there is ethics in not being able to help the environment, data for good, health, and so on and so forth. So ethical decision making involves both risk assessments, but also risk reticence, also benefits and purposes, positive purposes of using data. So with that, I very much look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Bojana, and to all our listeners. You've heard and seen how the discussion has actually come full circle with Bojana, anchoring the statements of trust, and again going beyond the minimum, and now really going beyond compliance as we now tackle this new emerging technology, a very powerful tool indeed, which has really been touted to provide a lot of benefits, but raises a lot of concern. All right, so we are going to now open the floor for discussion and questions. So if you have any questions, probably is our chat box open to the audience, but definitely they can send the questions. So we'll be addressing the critical issues raised by our speakers. So let me start by saying this. Again, we are those listening to us, the regulators, again, and coming from different jurisdictions, have been listening about AI and studying its implications to them. So let's address this in a very practical manner to jurisdictions and to DPAs. Let me just ask a hard question. Should ethical frameworks be mandatory under any circumstances? Do you think there will come a point where ethical frameworks will now be part of the menu of accounting the level of accountability, compliance, and now digital ethics? What are your thoughts on that,
I
Stephen?
think,
All right,
sorry.
Irina, please.
I was going to say, I think ethical questions, especially in the AI context, are very contextual. And I think trying to mandate frameworks might not work well. I'm really glad to see that the conversation has moved beyond ethical principles, because everybody for a while was issuing their list of ethical principles, and we really need to start talking about how to put that into action. And, the term is operationalize those principles. But when it comes to operationalizing, I think it has to be sector specific. It has to be more attentive to the context in which the AI is actually being deployed. And we're somewhat doing a disservice talking about sort of all AI and all data as if it's one thing. Because, when Constanza was talking about the most high risk places and the most problematic applications, those are very different than if you're using AI to analyze weather data for patterns, right? So I think the most difficult context is the one where we attempt to use AI to make predictions, so not looking at past patterns, but somehow anticipating the future, and B, about human beings, which are so much more varied than all kinds of other things we can try to measure and control, right? So I think to try to apply the same framework to a system that's trying to make predictions about human beings versus to a system that's using very different kind of data for very different, let's say industrial purposes, just wouldn't work.
Thank you, Irina. Stephen, would you have your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fascinating thing I observe is that AI is a tool, and that often the thing that the ethics around is not necessarily the use of the tool, but the outcomes that are achieved. Many of the worst things that people worry about around AI when they talk to me about them are actually problems about late stage capitalism or dehumanization that you can actually do quite well in a warehouse full of people with bits of paper moving around. You don't need an AI to do these things. It might allow you to do them at greater scale or greater pace. But I think the ethical issues sit at the outcomes, your business model, your engagement, the how you're operating. AI becomes a component that drives that. But I think trying to get the issue just down to the ethics of using AI may well miss some of the larger problems that actually are the kind of issues that people are worried about. So I don't think we need necessarily a framework for AI. We need a framework for businesses and driving them to be ethical that obviously extends much wider than just the elements of data privacy that many of us as regulators are concerned about.
Bojana, you were raising your hand.
So yes, I would actually agree. I think with both Irina and Stephen that I don't think we need mandatory AI ethical frameworks or any ethical frameworks. We do need a nudge from regulators to set the expectations of what the regulator believes companies should achieve, but leaving it to companies together. And that's why I think accountability models, which sort of get companies to sort out the leadership and oversight, to appoint external properly functioning committees, to have reporting and tone from the top, to ensure there are risk assessments the way Irina talks about, so that really true risks can be addressed. We want to set some outcomes. We want to give the nudge, but let businesses develop what they need to develop contextually in line with what they're doing. And very important, somebody mentioned the incentives. We need to have incentives in the law. Those organizations who are able to demonstrate their ethical behavior and accountability, they should be allowed to do more with data. They should be ones taking part in regulatory sandbox and potentially even mitigation and enforcement. Or they could be perhaps even in public sector suppliers, right? Because we know that they do, we trust them, and they've got the way, this sort of accountability or ethical framework. But that's how I see it. It's really the nudge.
Yeah. Well, Bojana, regulators can do both the nudge and the nag. And the nag. Well,
Yeah.
Constanza, you raised a very important point earlier. You were talking about prototypes, high-stakes situations, and Bojana raised a very important matter. And I thought you also raised that, Constanza, about incentivizing and disincentivizing, and really putting a premium now on firm level. Those who practice ethics on the firm level should be incentivized, right? And regulators could also would have a pivotal role in doing that. Anyway, Constanza, your further thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, I do believe that self-regulation is completely vital, and talking about incentives and how to align these incentives that make sense both for the company, actually part of their business model has to be aligned with being ethical nowadays. You cannot survive as a company. However, I do believe there is a very important conversation to be held that self-regulation is not enough. I completely agree that the context is necessary. I completely agree that the risk level is necessary. And in this sense, there are certain risks that do need to be regulated. There are certain contexts that do demand for clear boundaries of what is allowed and what is not. When we're talking, Stephen, I know that you work with children. When we're talking about children's rights and the wellness of children, this should not be a self-regulated thing to rely upon the corporate social responsibility or the incentives of a company given the market size. I believe that it is yes, a delicate balance, but I do believe on the strength and the appropriateness of having certain regulations in place when the context and the risk level, especially in terms of reversibility, where we cannot take back the harm that was made through the use and deployment of certain applications. I do believe that those factors do need to consider certain boundaries that are beyond self-regulation.
Thank you, Constanza. Well, as a young regulator, I would consider myself and the National Privacy Commission one of the Benjamins of privacy here in this part of the world, in the Asian region. One thing I learned very early was that privacy regulators are not the gatekeepers of what can or cannot be done. We are technology neutral, but we're here to remind everyone about the risks, of course, but also probably the benefits of using personal data. And Bojana, CIPL has been issuing a lot of very important and meaningful writings, accountability and compliance. And ethics really resonate. And I'm just again coming from the region of Asia, where ethical frameworks is centuries old, and civilizations built on ethics. Irina, you were talking about certain contexts. Do you think there are certain jurisdictions that may be predisposed to the practice of ethics, say, as a way of, as a cultural, a way of culture or probably history? Do you think some jurisdictions would have certain advantages in promoting or even become really good at promoting digital ethics?
Personally, no, I don't think so. I think we all have, I think we all, wherever we live as human beings, make ethical decisions all day long in our lives about how to be, good spouses, good parents, good citizens, how to do the right thing. And so we all have our own context. We all learned that somewhere, right? To tell the distinction between right and wrong, and to make judgments along the way. So I don't think that any part of the world sort of has a premium on that. I think we have slightly different models. I think a lot of the ethical um, overarching themes cross cultural boundaries, and that we all agree on a lot of things being wrong and a lot of things not being wrong. Um, I think we really need to concentrate, especially in the context of AI, more not so much on the distinction between cultures, but on the distinctions between people who really understand the capabilities and the limitations of AI and the people who don't. And my big concern are the people who have been fed a lot of hype about what AI can do, and with the best of intentions are deploying it in all kinds of contexts where it's not ready to be applied and causing harms right now. So rather than trying to educate, I think it's important to educate each other about our sort of ethical, backgrounds and contexts. But I think the key need here is to educate each other and regulators very much about what AI does well right now and what it does not, and to not deploy it until it's been proven to actually, help humanity as opposed to harm it. I think one interesting, so just to take us in a slightly different direction, we talked about trust, and one question I have is how companies might regain trust, because so many of them have lost it already. So what do you do then? What if you're a large company with lots of data, lots of AI ready to be deployed, and nobody trusts you?
All right. Thank you, Irina. Stephen, you were raising your hand.
I did, yeah. I had an interesting thought, also linked to what you said earlier, Raymond, around your golden rule. The idea that the best system is one that you would happy have applied to yourself. And I think, although I absolutely agree with your point around there are ethics everywhere in the world, one of the challenges I see in some of these AI systems is that they tend to be developed in one or two places around the world. And in some of those places, the people designing them perhaps look quite a lot like myself. And what may be
Yeah.
acceptable for someone in
Yeah.
that privileged position is not the same as some of the people where these systems are used against. So I guess my point would be perhaps we need a platinum rule, one better than the golden rule, to go and seek out people who are going to be impacted by the system and make sure it works very well for them. I note that many of the systems that default with very low levels of privacy are perfectly acceptable for privileged people in the west coast of the United States, say, who are quite happy having that data published. You move that into other environments, other circumstances, people are quite harmed by having that data published. So I think it is important, although ethics may well, there's high standards of that around the world, people do operate in very different circumstances, and making sure the AI is built to support the most vulnerable rather than just the most privileged, I think is an important part of that ethical framework and thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And Constanza, Irina, and Bojana, you've been doing a lot of research, scanning the environment, and you've been working closely with a lot of privacy regulators. And what do you think the progress? How much progress has been made since 2018, when it was actually the theme of the 2018 GPA? What progress has been made by all the stakeholders, including data protection, privacy authorities, to develop ethical dimensions to compliance frameworks in AI? Have you seen the progress in this past few years, Bojana?
Let me start on a positive note. I'm always optimistic about these things. I think first of all, we have seen some really high quality, thoughtful work being done by a number of data protection regulators on AI and ethical and kind of accountable frameworks. UK Information Commissioner, um, Singapore, Hong Kong, just some to mention, as well as Canada. And I'm sorry if I've forgotten others. I mean, there really are so many smart and clever guidance. And what I really appreciated from data protection regulators is that they have worked on this in engagement with the industry, in engagement with data scientists. They were not sitting in ivory towers and writing something which is not viable, right? We really need to create something that actually can be implemented. So I really appreciated this sort of engaging spirit of DPAs who were working on this guidance. Um, uh, uh, Norway as well, for example. I've just remembered that theirs is a great guidance. And there are lots of commonalities in these guidance, but they're also a little bit different, right? And so the question is, what do we do about differences? And, we have to sort of understand that an organization that is global, or even an SME, a startup that wants to create a product that is global, is going to have trouble to apply with every single regulatory guidance. So I think we need to start recognizing each other's work being enough, right? And not requiring, oh, you have to comply with my national guidance as opposed to doing something else. And I have seen some of the European startups, for example, as part of policy prototyping, doing the AI impact assessments and really loving the whole process because they're actually learning a lot through it. But, they're not actually accepting any particular process. They've kind of done something which is a mix and mash of number of processes. So that's what I want to say to DPAs. I think the companies are starting to step up. I'm seeing, despite all of you, and I know, Irina, you say trust is incredibly difficult to regain. There is a lot of work being done by those organizations that are leading in AI development in terms of how they develop AI, how they sell the AI, and how they deploy it internally. So we as regulators, you have to incentivize and nudge and continue that work. May I also make a point which is about the difference in regions and culture? I think that in order to do the right ethical frameworks, we must have an open culture. It has to be the culture where it's possible to speak up and have a dialogue and ask difficult questions. Is it ethical? Is it not? Should we do this? Should we not? Nobody must fear to be able to say, should we do this? Have we thought about this? So open, transparent culture is absolutely necessary for proper functioning of ethical frameworks in companies and public sector. And I hope the regulators would encourage that openness as well. Even if we disagree, we must be able to say and have the debate.
Thank you, Bojana. Well said. And Constanza, you were about to also contribute to that.
Yes, and I completely agree that there has been important advancements. Actually, I'm very proud that, for example, Mexico is leading through these experimental governance types of mechanisms how to understand better through the participation with companies and experts in the field. What does transparency and explainability mean on the field? No, and what are the real tensions that are lived within an organization? What does it mean when somebody says there's a tension between speed and compliance and trust, and what does that mean on site? So I'm very proud that more and more regulators, such as in Mexico, are working together with the companies and experts in these open formats that Bojana just mentioned that are needed for these open conversations. However, talking regionally, and I think it's true in many other regions of the world, there's a lot to be accelerated in this open conversations. And I'm a bit afraid of these two cultures, if we want to say, the people that understand the implications of AI, both positive and risks, and people do not. I'm a bit afraid that in contexts such as Latin America, where there is not a lot of knowledge about the risks implied in these technologies, that we're not having the participatory discussions as needed. So that has to be strengthened. And based on a comment Stephen said upon the need for people to decide what is the limit and the boundary, I believe firmly that transparency and explainability to be the core of what is done in this field will allow for more people to be able to comment if that is acceptable or not. But we need to have that set in place and be explainable for everyone to understand the scope and breadth of actions.
Thank you, Constanza. Irina, I'd like to ask this question to you. Is ethics, are ethics principles or a skill that can be learned and can be taught?
Right, good question.
It's both. It's both.
All right.
And it depends. I mean, the word ethics encompasses so much, right? That we can have a whole hour long conversation about what ethics is. But it's definitely both a system of analyzing what is the right thing to do, but also a skill. And by the way, virtue ethicists would remind us that ethics is also about the kinds of people we want to be, right? Not just about what we do, but about virtues. And we can talk a lot about what are the virtues that AI incentivizes or disincentivizes, right? How does it shape us as human beings? So it covers a lot of ground. If I may, I want to go back for a second to the question you asked before about
Sure.
regulatory progress. Because I live in California, I think some really interesting developments have occurred in terms of California law. And I want to just make sure that we don't gloss over Costanza's earlier comment, which was that in some areas we do need clear boundaries, right? It's not enough to just sort of have a, general conversation and help companies regulate themselves, but maybe we say that AI should not play a role in certain decisions. And it will be interesting to see the interaction between the new California privacy laws, which are trying to allow consumers to have more control over what data is collected about them and how it is used and whether it's deleted or not, and how that will impact the whole AI context, which is so dependent on these massive data sets. I think there's some interesting progress in the US at the state level.
Uh, this is a question to Bojana and Irina, and well, to our panelists. Are you seeing now regulators? There's been a resurgence of laws that are being amended, and the laws that are new laws are being introduced. Some jurisdictions are emerging with their own new laws, and they're trying to address again. They're trying to keep in step with technology. Have you been monitoring these laws, and are they addressing these AI issues, or would you recommend now that they really take a closer look and tweak their laws to address this particular concern?
Yeah, okay. Um, I mean, look, so just to make it clear, and this is to Irina and Constanza, I mean, I live in Europe and I've been brought up on the body of data protection laws. And I mean, globally, majority of countries now have got data protection laws. So we are really talking about core regulation, existence of privacy laws, which have got principle-based rules and outcome-based rules, and then organizations being accountable, ethical, and then smart regulator, like a policeman, sort of, directing the traffic and making sure that actually we have got the best effect on the market. And that doesn't mean necessarily enforcing, it means actually encouraging and nudging, teaching what best looks like. So I kind of think that's the pyramid of what we need. US, I'm with you, Irina, needs to step up in terms of sort of having a federal privacy law. But Raimondo, I mean, I think that privacy laws give us lots of interesting tools and principles that are able to address today's AI. We have a principle such as transparency, principles such as accountability, fairness, which have got a complete new face in the world of AI. What we have to do is say what this means in the context of AI, right? Fairness in the context of AI actually means making some difficult decisions. It makes doing some trade-offs. There is a trade-off between fairness and accuracy. There's a trade-off between sensitive data and bias. So it's the tensions that arise between the law and technology that we need to kind of address. But I think we do have got the tools. Automated decision making, I mean, that's a provision that exists in GDPR, hasn't really been given very much application. There's some other countries copying this. But again, these are decisions that make legal effects, so similarly significantly affect people that are made solely by automated means. Irina, this is exactly what you're talking about. Really important, high-risk decisions being made without human intervention. So what do we need? We need the redress right. We need a right that explains how the decision is made, contest the decision, maybe correct something, maybe say, well, actually, it's a wrong decision. I want a human to review this. So that's what this right has, but we have to see it being applied. Final point, there are some countries which are now embracing new AI laws specifically. You have seen a lot of that in the EU. Other governments, I understand Brazil, UK, they're considering, even US. I think we need to start working with what we have and then see in the years ahead whether really there is a legal lacuna which requires us to fill this out with yet another law. I would say what we have done in privacy is very applicable to the world of AI. So let's just translate that and apply properly.
Okay, well, thank you, Bojana, and thank you for the views from you, Constanza, Irina, and Stephen. We still have a few minutes, so let me just from any of the panelists, would you like to lend your final voice on this matter? Again, we are addressing now data privacy regulators who are listening in this discussion. As Bojana mentioned, and Bojana, I've seen your work with with Hong Kong and Singapore, and yes, in the Philippines too. We have started now the discussions here with the companies too, and now they see the benefits of the discourse, and they themselves, right, are promoting ethical practices, and they've seen the benefits. So, do you see this matter of AI picking up on the viewpoint from the viewpoint of regulators? How should regulators reinforce or really prop up their authorities if they are not yet, if they haven't come up with an AI agenda? What's your advice to regulators?
I can start with a very
Okay,
short
Constanza.
ending point. First, the benefit of amplifying the agenda beyond privacy and into these topics that were discussed today will be important, because there's a lot of complementary topics in AI that go beyond privacy that must be enabled to make sure that an ethical use and a rights-based use is done appropriately. And second, the institutes, I found that the data institutes work very beautifully as a convener of agendas in different areas. So also understanding that there is a big role for example, consumers' rights institutions in countries and other type of institutions from the government that have especially an area of enforcement of a cycle in AI ethics will be important. So convening part is a must.
Thank you, Constanza. Stephen?
So in the UK, looking at the use of these technologies like AI as part of the COVID response, a group called the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation did a survey around UK citizens and said, what's the single most important predictor for whether someone is willing to use these new technologies in such a critical circumstance? And it wasn't how worried they are about the virus. It wasn't how old they were or how comfortable they were with digital technologies. The single most important predictor of whether they were comfortable using new and innovative technologies was whether they felt there was a strong regulator on their side. And I think that's the message I would say to all the regulators on the call today, is that you have a really powerful role in making sure innovation succeeds in a responsible way.
Thank you, Stephen. Irina, the fears raised by many experts that they don't expect AI or ethically driven AI would be the majority, meaning the prevailing thought in the next 10 years or in this decade. Um, is the alarm that they're raising or the worries that they raised, does that have a basis, Irina, from your point of view?
I think it does. And I think the real concern is that AI is so powerful and it's being deployed so quickly in so many different aspects of our lives that regulators too need to move more quickly. And I don't mean more quickly, to Bojana's point, to come up with new laws that may potentially not be good at all and, not do what, but move quickly in terms of understanding the problems, making sure that they have technologists on staff who can really explain what's going on, that they have really a multidisciplinary staff that allows them to also get the voices of the people impacted, like several of us have said. Um, it just, we can't move at the same regulatory pace as we have in the past, or we're going to completely miss the boat on this. And I think because of that, as I said earlier, I think the ethical analysis part is part of what keeps us at the right speed.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you, Constanza. Thank you, Boyana, and thank you, Stephen, with those last words, Irina. I think that's a clarion call to all my fellow regulators. We have to move quick. We have to move quickly. And I hope our discussion we were able to again clarify to our audience, to the many regulators attending this Global Riders Assembly annual event, again clarifying AI, its benefits, its risks, and how regulators can act on this. So, with that, thank you, and let me just remind everyone that after the break, 5 parallel sessions will be held with interesting topics such as, let me look at the program, data analytics, users' consideration and privacy, the United Nations Agenda 2030, protection of personal data, inclusive policies, poverty, marginalization sectors in the protection of personal data, regional cooperation in matters of privacy and personal data, and a cross-regional conversation, effective tools for secure, free data flows. But again, thank you for having such a battery of experts that are able to clarify so many matters about AI. Muchas gracias.